This is Michael Popok, Legal AF After Dark. Presidential immunity. Will it work for Donald Trump? Will he be able to avoid his criminal trial in March in the District of Columbia? Or will the weight of all of the immunity decisions that have been rendered against him come crashing down on him and let the trial go forward as planned? U.S. Supreme Court is very interested as to whether they have original jurisdiction to hear the case right now, skipping over the intermediary court, the D.C. Court of Appeals. But the D.C. Court of Appeals, not to be outdone, they would like to assert jurisdiction over the appeal, and they want to be heard first. They've got simultaneous briefing schedules, so it's like a battle of the bands. U.S. Supreme Court on one side, D.C. Court of Appeals on the other, and we talk about it one place only on the most recent episode of Legal AF. Take a listen.
So I think the United States Supreme Court, they'll get Trump's briefing on December 20th, despite Donald Trump and his lawyers saying they want the Supreme Court to step in. They're going to argue the Supreme Court shouldn't step in, and they're actually going to cite the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals expedited briefing schedule as a reason why the Supreme Court shouldn't step in. They should say, we may want you to step in after the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals rules, so delay it until after that happens. I think the Supreme Court's going to look at that expedited briefing schedule and say that it's premature for them to rule at this time because the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is moving quickly. I think we'll have a response by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and a ruling before February 1st. The part that I truly don't know, though, is ultimately, will the Supreme Court then take up this issue? And this is where you got to see what Donald Trump's, response is going to be. Is he going to argue this should not go before the Supreme Court, or is he arguing it should go before the Supreme Court and then it just delays, but just delay it until after? If the Supreme Court takes certiorari after the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals makes its ruling, say D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals makes its ruling before February 1, and then the United States Supreme Court hears oral argument, but sets an oral argument, because they may do that, and then they set an oral argument, what they believe to be on an expedited schedule, but like a 45 to 60-day schedule, and then that kicks it into the, into the summer. I think that would be problematic, Michael Popok, if that happens. And I'd prefer that the Supreme Court to kind of just, at this point, it's a tough one because Special Counsel Jackson says he wants them to hear it. But if they set it on a schedule that's in their own mind expedited 60 days, but it's after the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals makes its ruling, which I think will happen before February 1st, that becomes kind of problematic on the trial, on the trial schedule. I think the Supreme Court's going to hear it. I think they're going to hear it after the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals rules. And it is my hope that the Supreme Court sets that for more of like right away, because all of the briefings basically there, and that they recognize they want to keep this trial on schedule. That to me is the only variable of like actually delaying this trial date to an area where it becomes problematic is, will the Supreme Court set a briefing schedule that really kind of pushes this to a time that's, where it can't be tried before the election. Now, in the meantime, let's just not forget that Manhattan District Attorney case, that will go in March then. The criminal case against Trump before Judge Juan Merchan for Trump's failure to appropriately log the business records for his hush money payments, or to falsify or fraudulently place, put what these legal expenses were for, or calling them legal expenses when they were hush money payments. That case goes to trial then in March, and then this one gets kicked to the next one. I want to see this case go first, though. Yeah. So I acknowledge that my desire to have it go first is hoping that hope springs eternal. But I also recognize that if the Supreme Court does take certiorari after D.C., that could push it till after the Manhattan DA case.
I might be an outlier. I think this goes a lot faster. I think other than Bush versus Gore, which took about 30 days or less to decide the major issue of who's going to be the president of the United States, there's been no more important decision to our constitutional republic than whether Donald Trump is a convicted criminal or not before the November election. And I think they certainly can move a lot faster than we just mapped out here, and that they should. And one of the ways to do that, if they believe it's as important as I've just laid out, and the first signal that I may be right, and we all want to be, we all want it fast. So it's not like I'm trying to win a bet. But one of the fact that they even thought, you know what? Let's see if we can have a direct appeal directly to us. That's interesting. Let's give a fast track briefing on that. And then if they decide, and I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. I think Donald Trump argues, because he's getting his ass kicked, understandably, in the District of Columbia with these 3-judge panels, because they're generally coming up Biden, Obama, Biden, Obama, Biden, George W. appointees, and he's not doing well. It's a more democratic place.
Yeah, this current panel is Childs, Biden, Pan, Biden,
right.
and Henderson, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, but an old school Republican, not a MAGA.
Yeah, no, not a MAGA Trumper. So if I'm Donald Trump, I may, to answer a question you raised before, I may want to support trying to get argue for direct appeal jurisdiction of the U.S. Supreme Court, because, on paper, he's got slightly better odds there with some of the people that are on there. If they grab it, because they just think, look, this is so important to our system of government, our way of life, our democracy, that we are going to do the extraordinary thing, as Jack Smith said in his briefing. This is an extraordinary request, but this is an extraordinary case. And if they see that, and this is their moment, and it's a little scary to say that because we don't trust this Supreme Court for very good reason. Just as it was their moment in 2000 to decide by a 5-4 decision. It was one vote for Bush. That's why we had a presidency called Bush. It should have been Gore. Based on what was brought up to them. But if that is their new theory now, 23 years later, that we should make this decision and not leave it to others, then they'll make it quickly, just as they did in Gore versus Bush versus Gore. And I think that can get made after. What's the? Sorry, you're better with the date than I am. What's the last brief on the U.S. Supreme Court whether we should take jurisdiction or not issue?
December 20th.
Yeah, I think if they rule, I think they rule quickly after that, maybe with oral argument, maybe early January, and then they'll go we've seen the fast track briefing. They gave a week for Supreme Court briefs or less in the Bush versus Gore. So when they want to, they can get off the stick. And if they do that and they have it fully briefed on the fundamental issue of immunity by mid-January, they can make a decision by January and not terribly impact February or March. It won't roll out. I don't think they would risk, as an institution, deciding to take the issue and then knowing that the case has stayed and then just let it roll out to help out Donald Trump until the election. It would be, people wanted to topple the Supreme Court before because of the ethics issues and the way that they're ruling to take away women's rights to choose and expanding Second Amendment rights. Can you imagine what, you hear the MAGA Republican podcasters and things saying, this world, there'll be blood in the streets if Donald Trump were put in jail. Can you imagine what would happen to America if they took the case and then kept him from being tried and let him stand for election?
And that's why it was such a brilliant move by special counsel Jack Smith also to call Donald Trump's bluff. Okay, you believe you have absolute presidential immunity. You believe you should be treated like a king for criminal acts. If you believe that, and that's what you're out there saying, bet I'll give you the opportunity right now. I'm going to ask the Supreme Court to do it. Now, if you really want the Supreme Court to do it, like you say in your speeches, like your lawyer, Alina Habba, is out there saying you want the Supreme Court to intervene, if you believe you have this king-like immunity in criminal cases, here's your shot. And so it was the perfect aggressive, but it's also Jack Smith saying to the American public too, I'm doing everything I can do. You wanted the aggressive prosecutor. You wanted somebody who did every possible maneuver they could do. I'm going directly to the United States Supreme Court on this issue. And To your point, Michael Popok, it puts the Supreme Court in the hot seat. The American people saw what you did in overturning Roe. The American people saw what you did in gutting all of these rights. You claim that you're not trying to create this Handmaid's Tale, world, even though your ruling suggests the exact opposite. I'm going to put this in your lap right now, United States Supreme Court. You have the opportunity to make the statement that you're just for the normal type of Republican corruption, not the MAGA king-like Republican corruption. So here is your opportunity to basically, reflect that. And then finally, I'll say this. The issue is a simple one. Does a former president have absolute presidential immunity for their criminal acts while they are in office? That's the question. The answer is very simple. No, they clearly can't. It should not be complicated, both for the reasons the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals said in Blassingham, as it relates uniquely to Donald Trump's conduct, but as it relates more broadly and more fundamentally within our constitutional regime, within our democracy. Presidents are not kings, and Donald Trump is not the president. Those words, prophetic as they were by Judge Tanya Chutkan in 2021 in a case where Donald Trump was suing the January 6th committee, where he tried to assert king-like executive privilege before the January 6th committee got all of its records. And those words are fundamental and foundational to our democracy. It's fundamental and foundational to why you and I decided we're going to do this Legal AF show. we need to get that message out there. And finally, Michael Popok, I do want to turn, though, to the topic of...
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because I had time while you were giving that good analysis. It's even faster than I thought in Bush versus Gore. The Florida Supreme Court made a decision upon which the Bush versus Gore that gave Bush the presidency on the 8th of December of 2000. Okay? On the 9th of December, the court granted certiorari. There was oral argument on the 11th of December, and they ruled on the 12th of December. That was done in 4 days. There's no excuse if they take this case that they have to do it in longer than a week or two. There's precedent for them moving, no pun intended, quickly on issues that could rock our constitutional republic.
Well, look, here's what Donald Trump's going to, it's not a secret what Donald Trump's going to argue. He's out there saying it, though. He's going to say and again, this is because it's an objective reporting here on Legal AF. Trump is going to say, well, you waited. If you thought this was that big of a crisis, you could have filed this back on January, 7th. Obviously, Bill Barr couldn't bring it back. Bill Barr was out, and Donald Trump's own DOJ wasn't going to bring it against them, and they were cowardly. And then there had to be an investigation. So that becomes the argument, though, which is, special counsel, to have the special counsel appointed, to have the special counsel go through the process. Donald Trump obstructed this. Let's be clear, though, because I know there is a lot of reasons to potentially fault Merrick Garland for not bringing this sooner against Donald Trump. But let's also not forget that Merrick Garland also has secured over 1,000 convictions of January 6th insurrectionists, all the way up to the Proud Boys. And at every step of the way, Trump and his MAGA crew have been trying to undermine the rule of law, taking every possible appeal to block all of these things happening. Judge Beryl Howell, who we mentioned at the outset, she's the judge presiding over the Giuliani case. You see how all of the connections are made right here. But Judge Beryl Howell, who's a federal judge, so she oversees civil and criminal cases in D.C. She used to be the presiding judge in Washington, D.C. As the presiding judge, she was the judge assigned to all of the disputes before the D.C. grand jury. So she saw all of these January 6th cases. She saw all of the Donald Trump proceedings as well before the grand jury proceedings right there. And Trump tried to block everything before. Everything was a fight. Everything was a delay. Everything was a briefing. One other note about Judge Beryl Howell. And by the way, that's what I think Jack Smith's going to say. This was moved as within our legal system, this is being moved as expeditiously as it possibly can. And here we are, a federal judge has set a court date, set it. And I think Jack Smith has the more powerful argument. I just want to give you the arguments that are going to be made there. One other point about Judge Beryl Howell, though. So Elise Stefanik and the MAGA members of Congress who just do whatever Donald Trump wants. It's like the most pathetic thing in the world. Elise Stefanik now sends letters reporting judges to their judicial ethics committees that govern the judges if Donald Trump doesn't like the judge. So Elise Stefanik back in, I think it was either October or November, sent one about Judge Arthur Engoron to the Judicial Council that oversees the judicial conduct of New York State court judges. And Elise Stefanik just sent one complaining about Judge Beryl Howell because Judge Beryl Howell received an award from the Women's White Collar Bar Association in Washington, D.C. For her career achievements. And in the speech, Judge Beryl Howell talked about how big lies are permeating and how lies are distorting truth and how our democracy is under attack. Elise Stefanik says that that statement by Judge Beryl Howell was inappropriate and shows her bias against Republicans, who I guess Elise Stefanik's just saying the quiet part out loud, that if you condemn and criticize fascism, you are condemning and criticizing one of the two major political parties right now, the one that Elise Stefanik is as a member of the MAGA Republican Party. So I just wanted to point out all of those connections.
Well, if you like lawyers knowing what they're talking about when it comes to politics, law, and justice, you've come to the right place, Legal AF. If you know all about us already, we appreciate you. Thank you. Take that clip, try to build our audience, send it to people in your life that you like, or maybe some you don't, and ask them to take a watch. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about and who this guy is, I'm Michael Popok. That was a clip from Legal AF. And you can catch us every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the YouTube channel for the MeidasTouch Network. Help them get to 2 million free subscribers. They're so close. Free subscription. I'm not kidding. And then until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.